Welcome back to another episode of Common Language, where we break down today's complex policy issues into easy to understand ideas to help curious minds stay informed and empowered.
Today is Friday, June 12th, and we will be covering three recent headlines, including the midterm and primary updates, the start of the World Cup, and Anthropic and OpenAI preparing to IPO. We'll be breaking down why these stories matter for you and what they reflect about our democracy, including Trump's influence, the current geopolitical landscape, and what's going on right now.
All right, so kicking us off with our first item, a couple of more primary races took place this past Tuesday, and the results are in. Some of the closest contested races included one in Maine. Democrat Graham Platner secured a victory in his primary. While the primary race itself wasn't super competitive, it was still a lot of attention on this because he's been filled with lots of controversy and scandals. And in South Carolina, incumbent Senator Lindsey Graham defeated Republican challenger Mark Lynch by winning about 57% of the vote and reinforcing his continued strength within the GOP despite periodic tensions between him and the rest of the party's more conservative base. Rounding us out, Rep. Clyburn won his race in South Carolina, and he pretty much coasted to victory, but this was after some potential redistricting attempts ultimately failed. Together, all of these races give us some more insights as to what we can look forward to in the midterm elections in November. Casey, what did you make about this last round of primary races?
Well, on the Democratic side, it's pretty clear that no matter what is happening, they want change. Whereas the Republicans are continuing to kind of double down on what has always worked for them. And I think part of that reasoning is because we have Trump in office and the Republicans have control. And so even if you don't fully agree with what's happening, like you're not going to just become a Democrat. The Republican establishment had its shakeup with Trump being the president. Like he's the one that provided that shakeup, and I don't think that we've seen the same level of shakeup on the Democratic side. And so it almost feels like Republicans got there first, and now we're playing catch up. So you have controversial candidates like a Platner winning. And this is a guy who has several allegations against him. A New York Times article came out with women talking about reports of abuse and violence. And, he still really came out on top. So I think it kind of just shows that, like, it's a lot more about the messaging when it comes to Democrats and, like, what they want to change. Like, Platner's big platform is all about taxing the rich, climate change. He's pro-union. He condemned the war in Gaza. Like, he's just coming at these issues with a very clear message. And I think that that's what people are resonating with the most. And they don't want the same old, same old.
I feel like this candidate, Graham Platner, is super interesting because, one, he is an oyster farmer, which I think is so cool. I have to say that and put that out there. But also, it's interesting in the context of Maine. We talked on the last episode when we were doing primaries, the weirdness of a state like Texas, but Maine is also a very weird state. You have people like Senator Susan Collins, who's currently representing it, and she is a Republican. And then you have Senator Angus King, the other senator, and he's an independent. And they are very similar to a state like Vermont in that, like, upper New England area where they aren't necessarily like Republican or Democrat. They're these kind of like independents. And Susan Collins herself is, I would consider, very moderate. And the big question now is those two going head to head, like the Platner and the Collins race. That's now going to be officially set up for November. And will he be able to capture the rest of the vote? There was a lot of weird controversies going on with him leading up to this race in Tuesday, the text messages and the kind of out-of-pocket things he has said, the tattoo. Like, it's a whole laundry list. But I do think that he has captured a lot of people with his like anti-establishment messaging and kind of pitting Susan Collins as someone who is very established, which She is. She has been in the Senate for a very long time. But him pointing out things like how much money she has made, how much her net worth has increased since she has become a senator, and kind of pointing out the inequities and all of that. The fact that he does have these scandals, I think it brings up that conversation again with when you have someone like Trump in office who is our president but has like all these scandals. It's like we are able to look past so much as voters because it just doesn't faze us anymore.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a desensitization against that. In the past, that would have been a no-go, non-starter. But I also think someone like Platner, he is a veteran. There is just this sense about him that people are connecting with. And that's kind of like the bigger message too. Who's connecting to the people the most? Who can speak to them
Right.
the most? That's who's winning.
Yeah, the Democrats getting behind a candidate like Platner does really signal that they are interested in platforming someone who is a little bit more on the progressive side. And I think that the reason why they are putting so much of their faith and money behind him is because they do really see this as a race that they can win. They think this is like one of the seats in the Senate that they really can flip. And so I think they're just putting a lot of backing behind him because they're seeing like the risk is going to be worth the reward. Yes, he's a risky candidate because of some of these, scandals and things, but they think the reward of getting this seat to flip would ultimately be worth it. And that's politics for you.
That's politics. Okay, what do you think about Senator Graham's win and the America First fraction of MAGA and that whole situation?
Senator Graham, he's a character and he has the backing of the establishment of the Republican Party. Yes, sometimes he goes up against them, but at the end of the day, he is friends with the right people. He had the backing of Lutnick. He had the backing of the crypto industry. He had the backing of Trump. Even though the candidate he was going against was MAGA, he was like an America First MAGA and was very anti-war. And I think seeing that play out and him, him losing while he was platforming the America First anti-war approach, like not ultimately being successful, shows us some insights about those MAGA fractions. And ultimately, it just comes down to the money, like we talked about with these primary races. Graham had the money and he had the backing, and I think that's why we saw him ultimately be successful in this race.
No, I agree. And I also think that the America First MAGA cohort of people are
Cohort.
it's like more of like a Marjorie Taylor Greene vibe, I feel, where it's like they kind of beat to the march
Yeah.
of their own drum, you know? They will go where the wind takes them. And I just think ultimately that is not a voter base that you can always 100% depend on, but it exists, right? So we have to like accept that that
Yeah.
exists and like know that they are kind of like swaying wherever they feel, they need to sway. But ultimately, it is showing, unfortunately, just the strength that the Republicans have, which is pretty freaking clear. Moving on to the World Cup. So, everyone, all the football people, not soccer, we have to go football. The 2026 FIFA World Cup began this week with celebrations across North America. So, it's going to be throughout Mexico, the US, and Canada. And the tournament is unfolding against a backdrop of political unrest and international tensions. So, demonstrations in Mexico City highlighted some concerns over social inequity, public spending, and security surrounding the event, and at the same time, broader geopolitical issues, including immigration restrictions, border security debates, and the conflict involving Iran has complicated the FIFA message of global unity, and not to mention the fact that Iran has a team participating in the games as well. And in particular, they have faced pressures both at home and abroad, and it is underscoring the tensions that's going on right now, even translating into sporting events and this bigger message. And I did hear too that Iran will be playing some games in LA, but they're not going to be staying in the US at any time. They are staying in Mexico and will fly for the game and then fly back the same day. So, it's very clear that there's a lot of tensions going on. And this is usually something that should provide a lot more unity in past World Cups. And also, not to mention the fact that football is the largest sport globally. So, it means a lot for the world to have these games. So, I don't know. It feels kind of ironic that we can't really get that sense of unity this time around. What do you think, Mac?
It's certainly interesting because we've talked about this idea of soft power and how that influences policy. And I think sports is one of those elements of soft power. It's something that can serve as a vehicle or be leveraged to influence culture and broader political outcomes. And so it's funny because we thought about doing Trump and Mamdani at the Knicks game as an item, and we didn't. But doing the World Cup item reminds me of some of the memes and TikToks I've been seeing throughout the NBA Finals Championship games, basically saying that it's bringing world peace because New York is a very diverse city, and this creator made this little chant about the fact that the mayor is Muslim, the bagels are Jewish, the Christians Dior, Knicks in 4, and then we saw Taylor Swift and Kylie Jenner hugging after the Knicks won on the floor. And so people are like, sports is healing. And that is, I think it's so true. But I think when we talk about it in the context of a little bit of a more complicated layer of other countries and a geopolitical landscape, that's when it gets a little bit trickier because there's just so many more layers and dimensions there. And usually we look to things like the World Cup, like the Olympics, as a time to unify, right, as the human race.
Yep.
And I think that because this is happening at a time where there's a major conflict going on in Iran, and this administration has really hung their hat up on things like border security and immigration. And so there are lots of travel restrictions, like you mentioned, the team. There are other teams that will be impacted by travel restrictions in the US. I think Haiti was another one. And so I think it does take away at the potential for something like the World Cup to unify us and like bring people together and realize, all the things that we have in common and celebrate something fun like a sports game. So I think the people that are protesting are right to do that and use this opportunity to talk about the things going on. But it's unfortunate that there are lots of concerns over security and travel because they're from another country and they're not allowed to, quote unquote, be here. So I know New York is hosting a game, right, Case?
Yes, New York will be hosting a few games. And I think one elephant in the room in this conversation is it's the US. Like, we're the ones that has the restrictions. We're the ones that have caused a lot of global tensions this year. It's the US. So I wonder, speculate, if the games were in, I don't know, a different country that wasn't so contentious right now, would it be more unifying there? And it's because it's here in the US where we have not been really kind to our allies and really, really defensive this past year that, we're not really feeling it because it just does feel like energetically something's kind of off.
I do think that you're right that it's very interesting to think about, what if this was hosted in another country? Like everything else still going on, but this was in another country would feel the same. And I think you're right. It would be different if this was hosted elsewhere, but because it's in the Americas and we are the one responsible for all of the issues around conflict and immigration right now, it lands differently. I hope it will be fun for some people, but I think it does highlight more of the tensions than the promise and opportunity of unity. this time around.
Yeah, and I will say too, I know the World Cup means so much for so many people, but soccer in America is not that big. Like, I was in Mexico City in April and they were insane about the World Cup. Like, you felt the energy being there months before it was starting, and like, we're hosting games in my city, and like, it's just not the same. We don't have that same level of enthusiasm for soccer. Sorry. Although I know there are a lot of
Yeah.
soccer fans, I'm just saying, like, it is just very different in the US. So, like, I don't know if we should really be hosting, but anyway.
Yes, I'll say go Team USA. I do love an opportunity to be patriotic, and I feel like the Olympics and things like the World Cup give me opportunity to wear red, white, and blue. But I saw this shirt. It was an American flag in the shape of a heart, and it said, but in a liberal way. So go Team USA in a liberal way. Moving on to our last item. So the artificial intelligence industry is possibly on the verge of its biggest public market moment yet because both Anthropic and OpenAI have confidentially filed for initial public offerings with valuations approaching or exceeding $1 trillion. So Anthropic kind of started. They were the first ones to come out and say that they were going to file, and then OpenAI basically like followed suit. And analysts expect that the offerings will reshape the technology sector by giving investors direct exposure to leading AI companies rather than relying on indirect bets through firms like Amazon, Microsoft, or Alphabet. And these IPOs could ultimately test whether public markets can absorb several massive technology offerings, because we also had SpaceX make its public debut on the market today within a short period of time. So, Casey, we have talked a lot about AI and the impact on communities, the economy, and the technology sector, as well as the way that government interacts and shapes this sector. So, what do you make of the fact that they're going to go public?
Well, number one, I'll say I'm not surprised because I think that that was kind of the natural next step for like all of these things, right? Like they want to fast track all of this AI stuff. So they're going to need more resources to do that. So, going public is going to allow these companies to have the flexibility of, much more cash, and it takes their growth and kind of exponentially changes the trajectory. But also, from a regulation standpoint, they're going to be under a lot of other scrutiny because they're part of the stock market, So when you think about the costs, not just economically, but also environmentally and from a community perspective, I think we just haven't really fully fleshed the whole AI thing. We've been pedal to the metal on it, but we haven't really fleshed it out. And because there aren't like any legislative restrictions, it does feel like just another opportunity for wealth and greed to accumulate with very little checks and balances. Again, not surprised. And let's take SpaceX as a perfect example. They went public at an IPO price of $135 per share, record-breaking number. And upon hitting the stock market, that it surged 25%, and now they're at 169 a share. So Elon Musk is now the first trillionaire ever. And, of course, it's completely equity driven, but it's like, boom, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can't expect that the people in power right now are going to all of a sudden, like, be interested in other people and the world. So, I think it definitely raises concerns about people and the world.
Yeah, it certainly does. And it particularly raises concerns around that because government has not caught up to industry yet. And I mean that to say that there aren't, to your point, Case, lots of legislations or regulations in place to kind of curb bad actors
Hmm.
in this space. And so with them kind of exploding by going into the public market, that just opens up a whole nother kind of Pandora's box here. And puts government even further behind on track with what they have to do in terms of catching up to industry and regulating this in a responsible manner, because like we've talked about on the podcast, ultimately, who's going to get hurt the most? It's the communities that don't have the power, influence, or money to protect themselves, their resources, their land, and their neighbors from the potential detrimental effects of AI that's going to have just a whole domino effect and windfall of repercussions, good and bad on the global, scale.
100%. The fact is, we are seeing the influence of AI in so many ways, from, personal use to like you can't get in touch with anybody nowadays. If you have a problem, everything is like a chat bot. There's no form to raise your hand anymore and like actually talk to someone. When we think about the role that AI plays in our life now and the role that it will play even a year from today, things are going faster than we can even really anticipate. And then on the other side, I think, we have to look at AI as also a tool. So it's like a tool can be used for good, a tool can be used for bad. It feels like we're playing with like this karmic, like Pandora's box energy, and I don't like that. Based on who's in charge right now, especially.
No, it certainly feels like, am I in a Black Mirror
Yeah.
episode? Like, is this Play About Us?
Yes.
Like, kind of thing? Because the pace at which this is moving and the scale at which this is growing into, right? Like, these are anticipated to be some of the biggest debuts on the market in history. And so, what will that mean for our economy? One of the speculations is that it's potentially a bubble. And if this is the biggest debut, but it happens to be a bubble, then we're going to see the worst kind of economic downturn in history as well. Again, like risk and
Right.
reward. It seems like we're risking a lot here, and will the payout be worth it or not? I mean, I feel like obviously only time can tell. I wish I could see like into the future, but I do think whether it bursts or not, I do think that A is going to change. I mean, it already has,
Yeah.
obviously. It's going to change just so much from a labor market standpoint. The coders themselves are using this, and there's so many other jobs that are being shifted and eliminated. I think back to our episode with Megan where she's like, I was like, is there anything we can do to change the course of history? And she was basically like, no, it is inevitable. This will
Yeah.
happen. And so I'm just like, okay,
Yeah.
gotta brace
I have to
ourselves.
say one more plug because, I think that one thing that we're seeing is greed and just like a total lack of empathy and a lack of humbleness everywhere. So, to draw a parallel right now, the Knicks are up 3-1 in the NBA playoffs against a team that should be beating them big time. And the last game, we had Wemby, who is a star player, and he's not humble. And he's coming in there, coming in hot, saying, I'm in your mind. And then he gets his ass kicked. And I feel like this is a time where what we need is humbleness. What needs to be rewarded is looking out for your neighbor. What needs to be rewarded is like doing the right thing when no one's looking. And because we've fallen so far from that track, I think that it has allowed, because it's human nature, right? It's like it's a spectrum, and there's always good and evil at play. So it's like we've really allowed this overconfidence and this dominating force to be what success is. And because we view success by dominating everybody and power plays and all of this, the scales of balance need to come closer together. And I think that this whole situation is going to be historic for the ways in which it hurts people, but also for the ways in which ultimately there will have to be a rebalancing.
Certainly. I think the yin and the yang is at play, and although we can't quite anticipate what this will mean for the industry and the economy at large, I foresee us covering on this podcast some type of legislative effort, some type of regulatory effort that will once again kind of shift things and shake things up in this space. And so I'll be interested to see what exactly that looks like from a policy perspective. But that's all we have for now. And thank you all for listening in to another episode of Common Language. If you want to hear more or come into the comments with your own perspective and opinions, we welcome you to follow us on all of our socials and stay tuned for our next episode.
Bye.